Hello. This is an intro to the Atlantic Revolutions. This is the unit we'll be covering right after we do the Columbian Exchange, which was the Europeans, Spanish first, then Portuguese, French, and British, coming to the Americas, setting up colonies, and eventually bringing in slavery and conquering the land. So this next unit, the Atlantic Revolutions, the one that we're doing right now, will be more about what happens as a result of that interaction between these new colonies in the Americas and the old countries of Europe and the tensions that arise there. This period lasts from effectively 1776 with the American Revolution and then goes until 1821 with Mexican independence. And so that period there of about, 47 years or whatever it is one of these moments in history where a whole lot of things change. And basically any of the ideals that we still believe in about freedom and equality and things like that come out of the Atlantic Revolutions. And they spread even to countries that were not involved in the Atlantic Basin. The ideas of the Atlantic Revolution come out of a couple of points, basically, or at least the unit will explain it this way. One is the Enlightenment. There is a period of time in Europe where, right before the Atlantic Revolutions, after the Renaissance, after the Scientific Revolution, where Europeans begin to think about rights, basically natural rights. Should humans all be free? Should there be free trade? Should people believe that man is inherently given the right to free speech, freedom of religion, all of these other freedoms? And that idea of enlightenment is something that catches fire not just in Europe but very quickly in the Americas, and not just amongst Europeans who have come to the Americas but amongst everybody in the Americas. The strength of the idea of freedom is something that especially people who are slaves or suffering under the encomienda or otherwise oppressed by Europeans find very appealing. The other main cause of the Atlantic Revolutions would be the economic inequality and tension that comes out of the colonial trade systems called mercantilism that get built in the Columbian Exchange. So Spain and France and England and Portugal create these economic systems that are extremely exploitative and extractive of the Americas. Basically, they just want to take stuff from the Americas and they give back very little. They saw them as a cash cow. And at first that was fine. You had a very small number of very aggressive Europeans who ruled the Americas for European metropoles or major powers back in Europe, France, Spain, England, those people. But as the Americans, both African Americans, Native Americans, white Americans who've been there for sometimes hundreds of years by the time the Atlantic Revolution start, these Americans begin to feel a real frustration with these economic pressures and inequalities between the American side of the Atlantic and the European side of the Atlantic. And so those pressures will also feed into the Atlantic Revolutions. And the Atlantic Revolutions will have a really colorful cast of characters, not just the giant masses of people, French people, American people, Haitian people, Mexican people, Venezuelan people, people who are Native American, people who are European, people who are mestizo, people who are Creole, people who are slaves, people who are anything you can possibly imagine. There is this giant mix of general classes of people, class-based, race-based, religious-based, who are characters in this set of revolutions. And then there's also a whole series of extremely colorful, like, great person characters. Jefferson, Washington, Adams, Franklin, Hamilton, the founding fathers in America, who really are these great geniuses who build one of the first great bills of rights and a constitution that we still use today. And then in France, you see people like Lafayette and Danton and Robespierre and Napoleon, all of whom will be extremely influential in creating another version of rights called the Declaration of Rights of Man, and all manner of new kinds of freedom and state structures and citizen armies and things like that in France that will spread throughout Europe, turning the Atlantic Revolutions into a European thing as well. In Latin America, you have Simón Bolívar, you have San Martin, you have a whole series of leaders in Mexico who push for various levels and types of independence. And so you have these great giant wars and conflicts of independence throughout Latin America, from Rio Grande down south to the tip of Patagonia. And then you have the one great slave revolution of this period as well, which is part of the Atlantic revolutions, where Toussaint Louverture and Haitian slaves throw off French rule, throw off white rule, and become free. And for a time are actually able to be represented in the French Chamber of Deputies until Napoleon comes along and screws that up. And then you have a much tougher revolutionary leader called Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who will run the Haitian Revolution to its full and complete sense of freedom from France. Although there will be some terrible exploitation of Haiti afterwards from the United States, from kind of the entire world community. Not all these revolutions go well. Some go very well, and those revolutions that go very well tend to be run by people who were already doing very well. Jefferson, Franklin, those sorts of people. And the revolutions that don't do very well, Haiti, are places where poor people often have a really rough time making a good revolution. The basic issues that run throughout the entirety of the Atlantic revolutions are the big issues that we think of as the founding issues of the United States. Liberty, also known as freedom, equality, citizenship, who is a citizen and who is not. Should Native Americans be citizens? What is the position of black people, whether slave or free? So citizenship is a tense question in a lot of these places. The very question of slavery, should slavery exist in free nations? Some of the Atlantic revolutions decide no, and ours, for example, decides yes, you can have equality and slavery at the same time. There are also huge questions of property. Who gets to own things and why? And finally, there's the giant questions of nationalism. What makes a nation a nation? And a lot of these countries coming out of the Atlantic revolutions, France, the United States, Venezuela, Argentina, Haiti, all of these places come out feeling that they are a nation, not just a bunch of people who are ruled by some king back in Europe, or in the case of France, a bunch of people who are ruled by the guy who lives in Paris. Instead, people begin to think of themselves as Americans, as French, as Haitians, as Venezuelans. And that idea of nationalism and national freedom is another big part of the Atlantic revolutions. It's a huge period, a very revolutionary period. It kind of uplifts a great many people, and it leaves many people behind. But that will be the course of this unit, the Atlantic revolutions. Thank you.